Hello everybody. In this video we will talk about for loops in Python. Many objects in Python are iterable, meaning we can iterate over every single element in an object. Such as every element in a list or a string, we can use for loops to execute a block of code for every iteration. Iterable means that you can iterate over an object. For example, you can iterate over every item in a list, every key in a dictionary, or even every character in a string. Let's see the syntax for loops in Python. Okay, so this is the syntax for loops in Python. So here let me explain what is happening. First, I created a list with elements called 1, 2, 3, and then I have said for item in iterate. The keyword for is referring to the placeholder or the variable name that you will call right after saying for, and it will represent individual item or element inside of an object. Then I have said in iterate. The keyword in is referring to the object name that you want to loop or iterate through, and then we have a colon and then some indentation, and then finally we asked Python to print item, which will basically print the variable item that we have defined after the for keyword. Again, this is a placeholder or a variable name, so in your case you can call it whatever you want. Also, if you haven't understood anything, don't worry, I will explain everything in detail later in Jupyter Notebook. So when you will execute this, you will get 1, 2, 3 as an output. Okay, now let's jump to Jupyter Notebook and explore these concepts. Okay, so let's begin by creating a list. I will call that list my list and set it equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Please make sure that you are not using list directly as Python internal keyword, or else it will end up creating problem. But in case if you do happen to create a variable with some internal Python keyword and you have gotten some errors, then you can go and restart the notebook. Go to the kernel, click on restart, and then hit on restart. This will restart the notebook. But after doing this, make sure to run all your cells again, because since notebook will be restarted, it will lose all of the data or code output after restarting it. Okay, now let's focus here. Now I'm going to iterate over every single element in this list. I will start off with the keyword for, and then choose a name for the variable or the placeholder that is going to represent all or each element in the list individually, and then call it num in my list colon. Notice the indentation, and then print each of those elements using num variable. So after executing it, you can see that we have got the output as individual numbers inside the list on a new line. Something that I want to remind you is that this particular variable name that you choose to represent each element inside the list, it can be whatever you want. For example, let me change this to m. Execute it again. As you can see, we got no errors and the output was just same as before. Now let me change it again to make it all clear. I'll change it to anything. Execute it again. Keep in mind that iterable or the object that you want to iterate should be predefined, but this variable name will only represent or refer to each element inside of the object that you will create. Now I want to mention that technically you don't need these variable names. If you want, you can still execute some block of code for each item in the list, even if the code itself is unrelated to the item. So I can say that print iterated. Execute it. As you can see that we got iterated printed out 5 times because of the number of the element that are in the list, which is 5. So when the for loop was iterating through the list, it just executed the code that I wanted to. In this case, print iterated. So the number of times the element in the list were iterated, that's the number of times print iterated was executed under the for loop. But keep in mind, when choosing this variable name after for keyword, you will have full flexibility, so you don't want to choose the variable name that is somehow related to the number or element inside of the list or the object that you are referring to using the in keyword. Now let's use our knowledge of if, else and elif statement with for loop to print out even numbers from a list. So we'll start off by defining a variable with 10 elements inside it. Then say for num in my nums, and then say if num module 2 equals to 0, print num. Okay, so here I'm saying that for every number in my list called my nums, then if num mod 2, remember mod 2 is the remained divided by 2, equals to 0. So if there is an even number and you divide it by 2, and if the remainder is 0, then go ahead and print that number using the print function. And after executing it, you can see we got all the even numbers from the list: 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. And I can even add else statement here. Print odd numbers. So I'm just going to use literal formatting here. If you don't know what it is, then you should probably go and watch my previous video about strings. Also, I want you to notice the indentation here. As you can see that even the if and else statement are intended. This means, and this happened because of the for statement. So everything at this indentation level is inside of the for loop. So this entire block of code is going to be executed for every single number or element inside of that list. So say if this case print num, or else print out the odd numbers. And again we have used some string literal formatting here. Now that's it for list. Now what about strings? Strings are sequence of characters, which means that we can iterate through them too. Let's see an example of it here. First I'll create a string, then say 4 letters in my string, print those letters. So after executing it, you can see that we got the output as how are you. So this is a way you can actually iterate through strings, but also you don't need to create a variable to loop through the strings. What you can actually do is that just straight up put the string here just right after the in keyword. You can see that the output is just same as before when we use the variable. Now to make this all clear, you can call the placeholder that represents individual elements in an object in for loop with anything you want. The output is just same as before. Sometimes when people get better in Python, they don't want to use the variable name itself. I'm talking about this to iterate through something for a certain amount of time. So think that you want to print hi for as many times as there are characters here. What they do is just instead of assigning a variable to it, they just use underscore, and this is a very common syntax when you don't want to use a variable name. Let me show you an example of it. So as you can see that we have printed out 10 as many times there are characters or elements in this string. Now this is it for strings. Now let's talk about iterating through tuples. First I will create a tuple and have 1 to 3 as elements inside it. For item in my tuples, print item. Run this and you get back 1 to 3. Now I want to talk about tuple unpacking. Tuples have a little bit of special quality when it comes to for loops. So if you want to iterate through a sequence that contains tuple, the item can be used for tuple unpacking. For example, I'm going to create a list of tuples here. Notice the length of the variable now. We got 3 because we actually created a pair of tuples here. And we have 3 pairs of tuples. Now let's iterate through them. For item, in my tuples, print those items. As you can see that we got the output as nothing special, but if you want, you can just print the individual tuples itself. To do that, you can do this. For A and B in my tuples, print A, then print B. Now notice what will happen when I will execute this. So here I am duplicating the items, in this case my tuples, inside of this sequence. So this means that you actually have access to individual items inside of a tuple. So if you want to print out the first item of all the tuples, you can do this. One, 3, and 5. Also, to keep your code clean, you don't have to really use brackets too. If you want, you can just remove them, and it will work just fine. Now I want to just show you one more example like this to finish off this video. I'll create a list of tuples with 3 elements in each tuple. For A, B, and C. In my ls, print B. So these A, B, and C are just basically a placeholder for each element inside of the tuples. Now let's execute it. As you can see that we got the access for the second element inside of the tuple, which is 2, 5, and 8. Now let's try to access the third element. Perfect. 3, 6, and 9. 3, 6, and 9. Now let's try to access the first element. Perfect. Again, 1, 4, 7, 1, 4, and 7. This method that I just showed you of accessing individual tuples inside of a tuple can come in handy when you have a long tuple and you want to access individual item in it. And you can add as many as placeholders you want according to the number of the item inside of the tuple you want to access. Well, that's it for this video. In case if you have any questions or doubt, you can always go to the comment section to ask them there.